Hello, welcome back to my channel. And today I thought I'd try something a bit different. I thought I'd try doing a review of an art exhibition which I recently went to see at the Cortauld Gallery in London. It's Goya to Impressionism. That's a bit of a cheat, really. It's trying to find a theme, a way of hanging together a thread for the paintings, when really they're just they were collected together by a guy called Oscar Reinhardt, this Swiss collector who tended to specialise in Impressionist paintings. And they've taken some of his collection and they've put it in two rooms in the Cortauld Gallery. It's a very small exhibition. You can walk around it really in about 15 minutes, actually, to be fair. But there's some good paintings. I wanted to give it a bit of an advert because it's worth attending and it's on till the 26th of May. So the paintings are put in chronological order, really, and they start with what is unfortunately probably the best painting of the whole group, and it's by Goya, and it's called Still Life with Three Salmon Steaks, and that's exactly what it is. It's one of those still lifes. It's just three steaks on a table, and it is absolutely brilliant. It's something almost exhilarating about it. The first thing to say is the extraordinary black of the background. Totally, it's all this shiny darkness like a black hole. And you've got these three steaks, and the way that they're draped over each other, he captures the texture of them so brilliantly. And, he was making this at the height of the Napoleonic Wars. And you really do, there is a sort of squeamish sense about this painting, these three slabs of meat just lying on each other. Somehow it recalls bodies, men lying on the ground. I don't know what it is. It's one of those curious things that artists are able to do where a simple image means more than what is actually in the image, if you know what I mean. And I found this quite an extraordinary painting, a brilliant piece of skill from Goya. When it comes to Goya, I'm more fond of his later dibujos, his old, those kind of strange drawings he did towards the end of his life of monsters and nightmares. But this painting seems to sort of preempt them in some ways. Next to it is another sort of nightmare painting by Géricault, a man suffering from delusions of military rank. Géricault became famous for painting the inmates of local asylums. This painting, to me, feels a bit out of place in this exhibition. It doesn't really fit with the other paintings. But I think it's a really superb example of what Géricault can do. Even if you didn't have the title, you'd know what kind of madness Géricault was depicting here. It's a very affecting, haunting painting, especially in the eyes, in the face. He captures this whole man's personality, this whole sort of madness he has about his whole idea of who he is. And you can almost feel it in the way Géricault has captured him on canvas. It's a really impressive painting, but a bit out of place with the other works here. On the next wall are two works by Courbet. The first is The Wave, a beautiful painting, a beautiful use of a sort of the blue and green of the wave coming over, really gives it volume. It's a lovely painting. Again, doesn't quite fit with the overall exhibition. And next to that is The Hammock, which is a very romanticised painting, which is not really my taste, so I won't spend much time talking about that. Then we go on to the next wall. There's a portrait by Manet. He's a difficult painter, Manet, isn't he? I'm never quite sure about Manet. He was a brilliant artist, and some of his paintings I think are some of the great paintings of the 1800s. But I don't always like him. He's a sort of prickly painter somehow, and this painting didn't do very much for me. But next to it was a painting that I loved, but I noticed that most of the patrons were walking past because it's one of those flower paintings. You go through art galleries all over the world and you come across paintings of vases of flowers, don't you? And no one's looking at them. I think it was in Holland where there's one gallery that's got an entire room full of them because it was a specialist of Dutch painting at one time. I think, they're quite beautiful, but a lot of people just get bored of them. And this is a classic example. It's Renoir, Lily and Greenhouse Plants. I've noticed, Renoir, a painter I still hold a candle for. I really love Renoir. But apparently I've heard that many modern art students hate Renoir and think he's a crap painter, and that his sort of very colourful, boisterous, humanist style of painting is going out of fashion. But I like it. This is not a typical Renoir. What I like about this painting is he's not gone for those kind of gaudy, overpowering, pictures of flowers in vases where you can almost scent the roses and it sort of knocks you out, and there's lots of beetles and flies. He's gone for almost, a market garden still life. your typical ordinary everyday flowers, sort of just put on little blocks. And it's a sort of, what he's doing is celebrating just the life of a simple flower. And each flower in the painting has its own life, its own distinctiveness, all set off by this wonderful sort of dark red colouring in the top left corner. I think it's a great painting, and I was a bit sad that many people weren't taking notice of it, because it was one of my favourites, actually. Next to it was an excellent early portrait by Cézanne of Dominique Aubert. We'll talk a bit more about Cézanne later in this video. I'm not the biggest fan of Cézanne, but this was an excellent painting. What is difficult to show in this image on your screen now is, what's most effective about this painting is Cézanne's layering of paint, so that the man almost seems to be coming out of the picture towards you. He has a very solid physical presence. You can almost feel the bunching up of his body and his muscles almost. I thought that was incredibly impressive, and I liked that painting very much. On the next wall, two oddities. First, Honoré Daumier, one of his many portraits of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. I had to look at this for a while before I got into it. I'm not very keen on sort of symbolist or non-naturalistic painting. In this painting, Quixote's body is extremely angled. It's almost sort of distorted out of shape. And then you get the sort of stronger, more stable shape of Sancho Panza behind. But actually, I thought it was quite brilliant in a way. It's not my favourite kind of painting, this kind of figurative painting, but I thought it was a brilliant evocation of what these characters mean. The sort of more sort of abstract, dreamlike figure of Quixote and his trusty, down-to-earth squire was quite well represented in that composition. You can compare it with another Daumier painting of Don Quixote outside. It's just outside the entrance on the right before you go into the exhibition, which I thought was particularly ugly, to be honest, but there you are. Next to it, apparently, is one of Reinhardt's favourite pictures of his collection by Corot, a girl reading. Very beautifully painted, good technical skill. Personally, I found it a bit dull, a bit Victorian, not really my taste. So I went very quickly into the next room. Now, the next room is what it's all about. These are the Impressionists. And we kick off with three from Renoir, our, painter that apparently youngs don't like anymore. The first, Confidences, is an absolutely typical Renoir painting. Lots of colour, that sort of weird kind of hazy fudging effect where the colours and the lines seem to run into each other, so that the two women seem to be almost merging. It's a lovely painting, not one of my favourite Renoirs, but I liked it. But it was the painting in the middle that really caught my eye and was one of my favourite paintings in this exhibit, the portrait of Victor Choquet. This looks like it could have been painted yesterday. It's so modern. You almost feel you could talk to this man in the painting. And Renoir's very simple brushstroke style brings him to life so much, his character to life. And we feel this isn't a person from the past, it's a person from now. And that's what the great portrait painters do, I think. I thought this was a fantastic painting. Compared to it, the milliner next to it, using a model he usually used, Nini Lopez, I thought was rather ordinary. On to the next wall. This was the dullest wall of the whole exhibition, I thought. First of all, we got a painting by Sisley, Barges on the St. Martin Canal. Sisley was technically a good painter, but, I've never found him very exciting. He's never really inspired me very much. So I passed that one by, to be honest. It was very dull. In the middle was a painting by Monet, The Breakup of Ice on the Seine. Now, when I first, I walked up to this very close, and he really packs in the paint. So where there's little ice flows on the Seine, right? And they're just chunks of white paint. And up close, it doesn't have much atmosphere. But when I walked further into the room and I looked back, it hit me because he'd done it so that the painting could be seen from a distance. And then the three-dimensionality of the blocks of ice really came out. And what also, when you're up close to it, the sort of chunky white paint takes your eye off the use of light. But when you walk at it from a distance, the light, the beautiful sort of almost purple twilight, and these very three-dimensional blocks of ice, it was a really stunning image, and I really, really liked it. Next to it is a Gauguin painting. Apparently Reinhardt didn't like Gauguin very much. I love Gauguin, one of my favourite painters of all time. But this is an early work for people who don't really like Gauguin. It's called Blue Roofs. It's a very good piece, but I like the later Gauguin. I like the exciting, weird, mystical Gauguin. So this was not one of my favourites. Now, we come to Paul Cézanne. Now, I know that for many people watching this video, Cézanne is one of the great painters of all time. I will admit to you, I struggle with Cézanne. My struggle with Cézanne is that I find him very cold, right? And I almost feel that Cézanne, for me, was almost the start of that approach to art where the artist is showing the mechanics of how he comes to the image. So that instead of just an image, a sort of representation of what he sees, we see blocks of colour. Everything starts to become stylized and made abstract. So in these two landscapes, Le Pilon de Roi and the Chateau Noir, you see what I mean? It's like they're very cold images. They're divested of the sort of robustiousness of life that you find in Renoir, which I quite like. And it's all about how the colours interact with each other and the sort of definiteness of the space, which I think that many people seem to admire because it shows them. It sort of almost deconstructs the painting while looking at the painting. And they kind of like that rigour, right? Whereas I found myself, it's cold. I find myself abstracted from it. I admire it without really being in it. And so I liked the central painting in this wall, and probably the feature painting of the whole exhibition, is a still life by Cézanne with faience jug and fruit. Now this is a large, unusually large, still life, but for me far superior to the two landscape paintings before it, because here Cézanne's use of colour combines with a real sense of the life of the fruit, and a sense of material. I can't explain it. Whereas the previous two landscape paintings seem very cold and hold me at a distance, this brings me in. Just looking at these little bits of fruit on a table with a jug and the beautiful blue colours of the wall, there's a sense of warmth, a sense of being, as well as this beautiful texture of the artist. And I thought this was a real standout painting in the exhibition. Now then we come to two Vincent van Goghs, or as it's supposed to be pronounced, I think Vincent van Gogh. Now, I should confess right from the beginning here that just as I have difficulties with Cézanne, I also have some difficulties with Vincent van Gogh. And they're demonstrated by these two paintings. One is the courtyard of the hospital at Arles, and the other is the ward in the hospital at Arles. Now, what I have a problem with Van Gogh is, one of the things he's beloved for is for his use of colour, right? I find his use of colour rather lurid. And I think it speaks of a sort of rather almost diseased mind. Look at the yellow in this courtyard. That yellow is sort of sickly. Now you might say, well, he's representing a hospital. But in this second painting, the ward, I'm so obsessed with that orange floor and the sort of blueness of the archways, the booths. I'm not really thinking about sickness or illness. I'm just thinking that the painting is rather lurid and uncomfortable. And I often have that feeling with Van Gogh. He was brilliant in a way, he was a genius in a way, but I find myself almost a slight sense of queasiness in his paintings, and I felt that very strongly with these two paintings in this exhibit. Then we come to a really interesting image by Toulouse-Lautrec. He's a very difficult painter to like, isn't he, Toulouse-Lautrec? Very messy painter. Sort of these kind of drawings of rather, disreputable quarters in Paris with strange people, with little dabs of colour. But this image, the clown, is a very interesting image of a female clown who apparently is not known. They don't know who she was, the art experts. And it's a very arresting image. You could see it from across the room. And just her whole posture and her being, the way Toulouse-Lautrec captures it, was very impressive. You can compare it again with some other Toulouse-Lautrecs outside in the main gallery. Next to it is another Manet. This is a very interesting painting. Apparently, there were two paintings. It was going to be a bigger painting that was split into two. I like this painting very much. At the centre of it is a woman who's got a very simply painted face. Seems to be a much starker face than the more complex characters around her. But actually, the more I looked at the painting, the more it worked. You know, the more it drew me into this incredible space, this cafe which seems to be rain outside, and just, you know, gave me a real sense of Paris in the late 1800s. And I thought it was a really great painting. The other paintings that are left, one is by Picasso. It's from his Blue period portrait of Matteo Fernandez de Soto. I'm not a Picasso fan. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? I go to these exhibitions, I've got problems with Cézanne, problems with Van Gogh, problems with Picasso. It's a good painting, but I can never get excited about Picasso for some reason. And then on the wall is two watercolours by Cézanne, Bathers and Mont Sainte-Victoire. All in all, so a very short exhibition. You can walk around it in 15 minutes, but I think it's worth your time and trouble. And it's particularly worth it because what you can do after you've visited the exhibit is you can go outside and you've got all the Impressionists there. So much better works by Gauguin, for example, and much better works by Monet that you can compare them with, and that's quite interesting. Sometimes these exhibitions they just sit there all on their own, don't they? They don't relate to anything outside. But this one relates to the whole of the Cortauld Gallery, and that's why I think it's particularly good. So even though it's very small, I think it's well worth visiting. Thanks very much. By the way, if you're interested in more art, painting-based videos on this channel, please let me know in the comments below.